Reacting swiftly, Tao Tao stepped in between the two, telling the two to stop. Lin nodded and turned away. Jacob took a deep breath, struggling to regain his composure. When the skeletal warrior had looked at him earlier, he truly felt as if his life was in danger, thinking he was about to meet his end. As a roar resounded through the air, the trial began. Everyone charged onto the island simultaneously. There were ponds and swamps everywhere, and many creatures could be seen lurking within. These creatures were half human and half fish, their bodies covered in scales. They did not resemble the beautiful and adorable mermaids from Tales, but rather ugly murlocs. Amidst the ripple of the water, a murloc suddenly shot out from a pond and charged directly at them. The attributes of this murloc warrior weren't particularly high. Before the creature could reach them, Tao Tao had already raised her shield and charged at the murloc. At that moment, a fireball flew out, landing precisely on the murloc warrior. With a boom, the creature was instantly engulfed in flames. Shadows danced behind it as seemingly out of nowhere, Ning Yi appeared behind it. Her dagger, emitting a faint glow, stabbed it from behind, ending its life. Lin received a notification that the murloc warrior had been slain. Everyone in the party has gained 1,500 experience points. Having quickly dealt with the murloc creature, the team continued to advance. They encountered several waves of monsters along the way. The closer they got to the mountain peak, the more numerous the monsters became. Now, they were even encountering level 21 monsters, which took a bit more effort to defeat. At this pace, it would take them at least 3 hours to reach the center of the island. "They're moving too slowly," Tao Tao commented. "From now on, when they encounter monsters, Emma will be in charge of crowd control. If they can avoid a fight, they will." Tao Tao decided to bypass the monsters to speed up their progress. The team quickened their pace. When they next encountered monsters, Emma immediately used her skills to control them. However, 20 minutes later, they were still falling behind. Other teams had already reached the base of the mountain, and the area was swarming with murloc creatures, making them difficult to avoid. The teams had already arrived at the base of the mountain, clearing out the creatures there in preparation to ascend. Tao Tao was ready to rush in, but Emma interjected, "The monsters here are level 22, higher than my level. She is not confident that she can control these creatures, especially with their overwhelming numbers." Tao Tao furrowed her brow. If they were to clear everything in their path, it would take at least an hour, and they would be left far behind. But if they rushed straight through without Emma's crowd control, it would be difficult. There was a risk they'd be surrounded by the murloc's creatures, putting the entire team in danger. For a moment, Tao Tao was caught in a dilemma. Lin looked at the path ahead. He had already found a closer route. Stepping forward, he declared that he would handle it. Jacob scoffed almost instinctively. "You? What can a level 17 guy like you do?" Throughout the journey, Lin didn't lift a finger and merely followed behind. Ning Yi huffed and told Jacob to shut up. Tao Tao shot Jacob a glare, signaling him to remain silent. She turned to Lin and asked him about his plan. Lin responded he would use a skeleton warrior to distract the murloc creatures and lure them away. Tao Tao's eyes lit up. She suddenly remembered that Lin was a necromancer. Using summoned creatures to lure the murlocs was indeed a great idea. With a thought, Lin sent the skeleton warrior charging forward, causing Tao Tao's eyes to widen in shock. The speed of the skeleton warrior was beyond her expectations. In the blink of an eye, it had covered several tens of meters, appearing right before a group of murloc creatures. The murloc creatures let out sharp cries, immediately charging at the skeleton warrior. The skeleton warrior paid them no mind, turning around and sprinting away. Drawing a horde of monsters with him, it ran farther and farther. With the path now clear, the team rapidly advanced. In just a few minutes, they had reached the bottom of the mountain. By this time, there were already over 100 monsters trailing behind the skeleton warrior. Under Lin's control, the skeleton warrior kept running further into the distance. Then, suddenly, the skeleton warrior vanished. Lin had recalled it to the summoning space. The murloc creatures lost their target all at once, each looking around in confusion. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Ning Yi giggled, saying, "That was amazing." Oliver and Emma also looked at Lin with admiration. They owed him big time for this. Jacob said coldly, "Why didn't you do that from the beginning? We could have been on the mountain by now." Lin turned his head, looking at him as if he were an idiot. With a chilling gaze, he told Jacob that was the last time. Jacob looked disdainful, but suddenly, a scream echoed from the mountaintop. Everyone looked up to see a massive number of murloc creatures charging down the mountain. The teams that had previously ascended the mountain were now rapidly retreating back down. Cao Cao's expression changed dramatically, ordering everyone to fall back. The team quickly retreated, distancing themselves from the bottom of the mountain. Hundreds of murlocs rushed down from the mountaintop, completely blocking the way up. Someone deliberately lured the murlocs over, and this person wasn't from their academy or their empire. It was a professional from another nation. Turned out, it was an Onmyoji class. The Onmyoji took out 2 talismans and threw them out, one to the left and one to the right. The talismans exploded in the air, and 2 enormous creatures appeared. Just like the skeleton warriors, they attracted the monsters from the pond at the bottom of the mountain. The Onmyoji sat atop his shikigami, floating in the air, laughing heartily. Cao Cao looked at Lin, and with an okay look from Lin, a skeleton warrior was already on its way. The appearance of the skeleton warrior immediately caught the attention of the horde. A swarm of murlocs screeched and chased after the skeleton warrior. In an instant, a third of the surrounding murlocs were drawn away. With the sound of cracking bones, another skeleton warrior ran forward. The second skeleton warrior employed the same tactic and drew away another batch of creatures. The creatures at the base of the mountain were almost all lured away, leaving only those on the mountain path. Even with these remaining creatures, clearing them out would be much faster than before. The surrounding students from their academy saw the scene, and many praised Lin. At that moment, a third skeleton appeared, and everyone shouted with excitement. The Onmyoji, who was just riding on his shikigami, had clearly drawn so many creatures that the path was completely blocked. To clear these creatures, it would take several hours at least. He didn't expect the students from the Hidden Dragon Squad to reach the mountain so quickly. It surpassed his predictions. He rushed towards the top of the mountains where numerous archers ambushed from the mountaintop. With a command from him, all of the archers unleashed arrows that exploded in the air and rained down like a storm. The archers of the Sakura Empire suddenly launched their attack. Seeing the ambush and rain of arrows, the mages summoned a magical barrier while knights activated their defensive skills. In front of Lin, 2 skeletons appeared, shielding both him and Ning Yi. After the first wave of confrontation, neither side claimed victory. Their formation was chaotic, and they had been ambushed. The scene was utter chaos. Lin had yet to make a move. He was worried that if the skeleton warrior slashed someone, they might end up dead. Causing a death would be problematic. The seemingly intense battle had resulted only in minor injuries. Jacob suddenly spoke up. "Captain, I want to join another team." Cao Cao looked surprised. She hadn't expected Jacob to say such a thing. Jacob pointed at Lin. "Either he goes or I do." Not just Cao Cao, but Oliver and Emma also showed expressions of surprise. They hadn't expected Jacob to use this as a threat, especially now, when they were already at the entrance of the dungeon. Oliver spoke in a deep voice, telling Jacob was going too far. Emma chimed in, saying if it weren't for Lin luring those creatures away, they wouldn't have made it up here. Jacob, ignoring everyone else, reiterated, "Captain, your call." Cao Cao glanced at Lin, and then at Jacob. She highly disapproved of Jacob's behavior. Yet deep down, Jacob believed that the captain would surely choose to keep him. Every other team was looking for mages, and without one, they couldn't able to continue. Jacob waited for a response with an ugly smirk on his face. Cao Cao made her decision. Her gaze settled on Jacob, telling Jacob to leave the team. Jacob, full of confidence until that point, thought Cao Cao would surely pick him. He hadn't expected this outcome at all. He was stunned and lost for words. Cao Cao's gaze settled on Jacob, and she calmly told Jacob that he should leave the group. Just moments ago, Jacob looked confident. He was certain that Cao Cao would surely choose him. Yet against his expectations, she responded with words that left him speechless. He wondered if he had misheard. He questioned Cao Cao whether she didn't want to enter the Creation Academy. He then warned the party that if he left the team, everyone's trial would end on the spot. Cao Cao looked at him. Everyone here wants to enter the Creation Academy, including herself, but perhaps Jacob had forgotten her profession. Tao Tao was an elven knight. Knights have their own creed. Without Lin, they would never made it up this far. Asking Lin to step down was something she couldn't bring herself to do. Jacob sneered coldly, warning Tao Tao to not regret her decision before leaving the group. Lin slowly stood up, suggesting that everyone get ready to enter the dungeon. Tao Tao was taken aback. What is going on? What does Lin mean by preparing to enter the dungeon? Lin surely knew both sides are still fighting over the entrance, and nobody from either side could approach the dungeon. As Lin stood up, Ning Yi Yi followed suit. Ning Yi Yi giggled while trying to pull Tao Tao up. Tao Tao looked puzzled. She questioned how could they enter. Oliver and Emma were equally perplexed, but got up to follow Lin. Lin walked towards the dungeon entrance with Ning Yi Yi hopping and skipping behind. She seemed to have unwavering faith in Lin. Tao Tao tells herself, if things go south, they can just come back. With her around, they were at least safe. The Sakura Empire probably wouldn't dare to kill anyone. The group of 5 suddenly approached the dungeon, immediately drawing the attention of the people from the Sakura Empire. They began to shout and curse, warning the group not to take another step. Professionals from the Sakura Empire yelled out, with their swords drawn and weapons raised high. In an instant, everyone had their weapons at the ready. Lin, however, wasn't bothered continuing to walk towards the dungeon. Tao Tao's heart raced. Holding her shield up, Oliver and Emma were also extremely tense. Only Ning Yi Yi seemed unfazed, saying, "Don't worry, it'll be fine." Everyone from the Hidden Dragon Squad recognized Lin. He was the summoner who had diverted the murlocs for them earlier. Had it not been for Lin's summoned creature earlier, they wouldn't have made it here. Although they weren't sure what Lin planned to do, the majority chose to protect him. They readied their weapons, preparing for another battle. Jacob sneered, "Idiots! Are you all seeking death?" Seeing Lin disregard the warnings, the Sakura Empire launched their attacks. Tao Tao raised her shield without hesitation, ready to defend her party members. At that very moment, Lin pointed forward. Whoosh! Dozens of skeletal warriors instantly appeared around him. Over a dozen skeletal warriors formed a protective circle, safeguarding the group and deflecting all incoming attacks. Everyone was stunned. They couldn't believe Lin could summon so many skeletal warriors and that the enemy's attacks felt so harmless against them. The group of 5 ignored the relentless assaults from the Sakura Empire's professionals. As Lin and the party moved closer to the dungeon step by step, the professionals from the Sakura Empire charged at them again. Yet, Lin ignored them and calmly chose the nightmare-level difficulty. The 5 suddenly disappeared at the entrance of the dungeon, along with the skeletal warriors. Tao Tao looked at Lin, finally breathing a sigh of relief. But without a damage dealer, what were they to do now? Ning Yi Yi giggled, telling her to just trust in Lin. His skeletal warriors are very powerful. At this point, they had no choice but to take Ning Yi Yi's word for it. Tao Tao said she would try to block the mobs and asked Emma to handle the healing. Emma patted her chest, reassuring her, while Oliver began to apply buffs. But by then, Lin was already moving forward. As everyone was still preparing, they suddenly saw a system notification. Defeated level 21 elite Murloc warrior, XP gained 10,000. Obtained 10 fish scales. Oliver and Emma, who were still in the process of buffing, were startled by the sudden notification. Then, turning their heads, they saw a fallen elite Murloc warrior lying in a pond ahead. Tao Tao's eyes widened, looking at Lin with disbelief. She was the only one who had seen what happened. Monsters in the Nightmare Dungeon, even with the perfect team set up, would take them several minutes to defeat. Yet she saw a few skeletal warriors go up, and with a few strikes, the monster was dead, almost instantly. Tao Tao was still processing what had happened. Ning Yi Yi, however, laughed, as she reiterated how Lin's skeletal warriors are amazing and followed suit. Oliver shouted, "I haven't finished buffing!" Tao Tao shook her head. Never mind that now, urging everyone to hurry up and follow. The skeletal warriors relentlessly unleashed their rampage strikes at the forefront, instantly slaying any monster that came in their path. Tao Tao had never imagined that clearing a dungeon could be this effortless. Every time they embarked on a dungeon, she was the most fatigued. Being a knight, she had to stand in the front lines, constantly vigilant of each attack from the monsters. She had to hold the monster's aggro firmly while also ensuring her teammates were protected. Unlike now, where all she had to do was follow from behind and essentially do nothing. Oliver and Emma shared the same sentiments. After walking through the corridor for quite some time, they finally reached its end. A vast cavern appeared before them. Suddenly, Ning Yi spotted a dark shadow in the water and cast a detection spell. It was the Queen's pet snake, Elite Boss. A 30-meter-long python appeared, its stats astoundingly high, far surpassing the Goblin King that Lin had encountered previously. It even matches the stats of the skeletal warriors. Without hesitation, Tao Tao looked to Lin, indicating she'd take the aggro of the monster. But Lin stopped her, saying there was no need. While none of them made a move, the skeletal warriors had already charged forth. Lin still didn't summon more skeletal warriors. In his eyes, the existing skeletal warriors were more than sufficient. One after another, the skeletal warriors leaped towards the colossal python. The python surged upwards, its massive tail sending several skeletal warriors flying. This was the python's first skill, Whiplash. The python's agility was unexpectedly impressive. No skeletal warriors could land a hit on it. The python swiftly slithered around the cave, its massive tail constantly whipping and sending the skeletal warriors flying. Tao Tao was growing anxious as she watched, but Lin reassured her. A soft glow emitted from his palm as he gently pointed towards the python. It was Lin's newly acquired skill, the Slow Curse. Suddenly, as if a massive red chain appeared on the python's body. In an instant, the python's speed was reduced by half. This time, the skeletal warriors easily captured the python. The swords and axes in their hands descended furiously, slashing hard against the python's scales. The python cried out in pain repeatedly. Tao Tao instantly recognized it as a curse skill, to which Lin nodded in confirmation. Powerful summoning creatures and curse debuff skills. What kind of profession is a necromancer really? Tao Tao wondered to herself. Deprived of its speed advantage, the python was now forced into head-on combat with the skeletal warriors. Suddenly, the python initiated another skill, Death Coil. While a few skeletal warriors were tightly constricted, bone-cracking sounds could be heard far away, but they weren't severely damaged. The python then spat out venom, which splashed onto the skeletal warriors. However, the venom was ineffective against undead creatures. The python tried everything but remained helpless against the skeletal warriors. Minutes later, one of the skeletal warriors pierced through the python's head. The python let out a piercing screech and had a look of defiance as it slowly collapsed. System alert: defeated the level 23 Queen's pet snake. Experience gained 50,000. Acquired silver-grade armor, snake skin armor. Acquired intermediate monster core. Tao Tao stared at the system notifications, then incredulously turned to Lin. Is it over already?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Lin nodded in agreement, but Tao Tao and the others were still in a daze, taking a moment to understand the situation. Ning Yi's laughter radiated with joy. The more impressive Lin is, the happier she becomes. She urged everyone to snap out of their daydream and catch up with Lin. When Tao Tao and the group finally came to their senses, they hurriedly followed suit. The cave reeked of fishy smell, making the girls cover their noses as they moved deeper. On the other side of the cave, a captivating scene appeared before their eyes. Ahead lay a magnificent palace. It was the Mermaid Queen's palace. The atmosphere here was drastically different than the cave. It was much pristine and orderly. From where they stood, all the way to the palace's entrance, squads of Murloc guards could be seen patrolling. Each squad consisted of 3 elite Murloc soldiers. These Murloc soldiers were clad in armor and wielded weapons. Ning Yi quickly counted them, realizing there were 60 squads in total, amounting to a force of 180 elite Murloc soldiers. Tao Tao recalled in the past, their tactic was to carefully target monsters lurking in the corners, luring them bit by bit for a thorough cleanup. It was a slow and strenuous process, but it was safer that way. Now, everyone turned their gaze to Lin. Ning Yi inquired, with so many monsters, what should they do? However, seeing the horde, Lin was secretly thrilled. The more monsters, the better. He pointed forward, and suddenly, all the skeletal warriors surged forth. Their sudden appearance immediately drew the attention of the Murlocs. At that moment, a detection spell was cast, revealing the attributes of these Murloc soldiers. While the elite Murloc soldiers had impressive strength and vitality, compared to the skeletal warriors, they were still weak. Soon, large numbers of the elite Murloc were rounded up by the skeletons. The skeletal warriors unleashed their rampage strike, and the Murloc soldiers retaliated with their abilities. When their skills clashed, it was no surprise that the skeletal warriors emerged victorious. "Cover your ears," Lin whispered to Ning Yi, who quickly did so. Tao Tao and the others were still clueless about what was happening when a thunderous explosion nearly knocked them off their feet. Then came several more deafening explosions echoed. It was Lin's corpse explosion. After a series of thundering explosions, Tao Tao and the group were left in shock by the rapid system notifications that flashed before them. All of the elite Murloc soldiers had perished, granting them a vast amount of experience and loot. It was the first time Tao Tao and the others had experienced the thrilling sensation of rapidly gaining experience points. They were all visibly exhilarated. At that moment, amidst the sounds of explosions, the grand entrance of the Mermaid Queen's palace slowly opened. Along with the brilliance emanating light from inside, out appeared the Mermaid Queen herself. Despite her towering presence, the beautiful Mermaid Queen retained an elegant presence. Ning Yi found herself locking eyes with the Queen, her pupils losing focus. Unconsciously, she began to drift towards the Mermaid Queen. Lin quickly grabbed her and pulled her back. But it wasn't just Ning Yi. Tao Tao was also affected. A skeletal warrior blocked Tao Tao's path. Two more skeletal warriors simultaneously blocked the path of Emma and Oliver. Only Lin and Oliver seemed unaffected. Emma, gritting her teeth through the pain, exclaimed, "It's a temptation spell!" Swiftly, she cast a skill, and streaks of light enveloped the party. Regaining her senses, Ning Yi blurted out, "What happened to her?" Tao Tao shivered, her eyes refocusing, questioning, what just happened? Emma turned to the Mermaid Queen, telling them that the Mermaid Queen had a passive temptation spell. Only Lin and Oliver were not affected. Had it not been for Lin, they would have walked straight to her and been wiped out. Lin, Oliver, possessing strong, high spiritual attributes, remained immune to the Mermaid Queen's temptation spell. The Mermaid Queen glanced at her fallen elite Murloc soldiers and suddenly let out a piercing scream. The once beautiful Mermaid Queen transformed into a terrifying visage. Her screams stirred tumultuous waves, and a fierce wind began to howl. Tao Tao observed the Mermaid Queen's insane attributes. In a conventional raid, defeating her could take hours, if not longer. However, right now, she couldn't even begin to predict what would happen next. Lin has completely shattered her established understanding of any professionals. The skeletal warriors struggled against the raging winds. Tao Tao wasn't sure how long the skeletal warriors could hold. The scene reminded her of a pack of wolves surrounding a mighty lion. The Mermaid Queen, wielding her trident, launched relentless attacks on the skeletal warriors. From the surging waves, several skeletal warriors sustained severe injuries. One, struck directly by the trident, was instantly slain. Tao Tao gripped her shield tightly, feeling that her turn to join the fight was soon. She asked Oliver to grant her a buff, then turned to the others, telling them to prepare for battle once Lin's skeletal warriors couldn't hold out any longer. Lin said softly, "No need." A soft glow emanated from his palm. He used his skill, Slow Curse. A red chain appeared on the Mermaid Queen, reducing her speed by half. Sensing the curse, she let out another ear-piercing scream. This time, her tidal surge skill was stronger than ever. A radiant azure light illuminated the palace as massive waves swept in, scattering the surrounding skeletal warriors instantly. Tao Tao looked towards Lin, suggesting he call back his skeletal warriors so they could step in. Lin recalled the injured ones, then pointed a finger. A chilling wind howled, revealing a sea of darkness in front. He unleashed the remaining 87 skeletal warriors. As soon as they appeared, they charged towards the Mermaid Queen. "There are so many of them. How can there be so many summoned creatures?" Oliver and Emma began to question. Only then did they realize that Lin hadn't deployed all his summoned creatures earlier. He had only dispatched a fraction of them. Ning Yi looked at Lin, thinking to herself, "Lin has grown stronger, much stronger." Nearly 100 skeletal warriors launched an onslaught on the Mermaid Queen. They relentlessly cast rampage strikes, battering her repeatedly. The Mermaid Queen suffered deep cuts and wounds, her screams echoing constantly. Her trident whirled frantically, and she darted around erratically. Under the effect of the slow curse, her speed was halved, making it impossible to shake off the skeletal warriors. Suddenly, her scream pierced the air. The Mermaid Queen activated her skill once again. This time it was the Queen's Lament. Emma hurriedly used the skill, hoping to cancel out the Mermaid Queen's skill, but this time it did not have any effect. Her level was too low to counter the Mermaid Queen. However, Lin assured her it was fine. Lin knew that the skeletal warriors lacked emotions and fear, and the skill does not affect them. The blades and axes of the skeletal warriors never ceased their assault. Finally, with one last scream of anguish, the Mermaid Queen fell to the ground. Experience gained 80,000. Obtained Silver Tier Weapon. Mermaid Queen's Sword. Obtained Silver Tier Weapon. Mermaid Queen's Staff. Obtained Mermaid's Tear. The description of the Mermaid Queen's Sword was a level 20 Silver Tier weapon. It granted 50 strength and 50 vitality, and it also increased the power of warrior-type skills by 10%. Mermaid Queen's Staff was also a level 20 Silver Tier weapon, granting 50 spirits and 50 vitality and increasing the power of mage-type skills by 10%. Ning Yi jumped in excitement. They had completed their trial mission. They were one step closer to the Creation Academy. Tao Tao smiled and said, "As long as they complete a few more trial missions and level up a bit more, they will be able to enter the Creation Academy." She then followed up saying they owe a lot to Lin this time. Without him, they probably wouldn't have been able to complete the trial. Emma agreed, and then whispered while saying Jacob was the absolute worst. Oliver said, "Don't even mention that guy. They should never team up with someone like him in the future." Tao Tao gritted her teeth. She despised people like Jacob the most. Lin quickly calculated the time. He turned to Ning Yi and asked if she had any cooldown amulets. Ning Yi's eyes sparkled, instantly understanding Lin's intention. Everyone else also looked at Lin and understood his train of thought. Outside the dungeon, the two empires remained in a standoff. Almost an hour had just passed, and another conflict had erupted between the two empires. Neither side had the upper hand. Suddenly, 5 figures emerged from the dungeon entrance. The people from the Sakura Kingdom were shocked at first, then started sneering upon seeing them, saying things like, "Only half an hour and they're out? Looks like they couldn't handle it and ran away." Another remarked, "Those skeletons are only good as meat shields." In their eyes, the skeletal warriors were merely a tad tankier and had a number advantage, nothing more. The members of the Sakura Empire were quick to mock and scoff. They never would have believed that Lin and his group had cleared the dungeon. On the other hand, the people from the Divine Empire and the Hidden Dragon Squad let out a sigh of relief upon seeing Lin and his party members return safely. Everyone began comforting them, saying, "It's okay. What's important is they came back safely." Jacob scoffed. "Lucky you guys even made it out alive, insisting on leading the group into the dungeon, and look what happened. Failed, didn't you?" No one paid attention to Jacob. Tao Tao scanned the surroundings and noticed that nobody else had entered the dungeon. She instructed her party to be on guard, prompting Oliver and Emma to draw their weapons and stand in front of the dungeon entrance. Tao Tao turned to Ning Yi and signaled her to do as they had planned. Ning Yi pulled out the cooldown amulet from her bag, nodding to Tao Tao, telling her they were ready to go. Under the watchful eyes of all, Ning Yi took out a cooldown amulet and activated it. In a faint glow, the dungeon's cooldown timer was reset to 0. The duo quickly entered the dungeon again. Tao Tao, Oliver, and Emma cheered them on, and then retreated back into the ranks of the Divine Empire. When everyone saw Ning Yi using the cooldown amulet, they quickly realized that her identity was no ordinary one. Acquiring a basic cooldown amulet was no easy task. It was a sought-after item that would cost a fortune to purchase it. The more observant among them noticed that the two had chosen the dungeon's nightmare difficulty. Tao Tao gazed towards the dungeon entrance, hoping that the duo would be successful. Emma chuckled. They had all witnessed Lin's capabilities, reassuring Tao Tao that they'll definitely be all right. Tao Tao smiled and stowed away her shield. Inside the dungeon, Ning Yi's face beamed brightly, making even the dungeon's foul smell seem less intolerable. She had previously asked Lin to bring her along for a dungeon run to level up before they parted last time, and she hadn't expected the wish to come true so soon. Lin smiled, saying that if he promised something, he would make sure to deliver. Ning Yi's smile grew even brighter as she responded. Then Lin have to keep bringing her along in the future, and not just this one time. Lin agreed.